A struggling dad meets a desperate family with 4 kids, one moment that will change everything. Before we begin, comment below and tell us where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far our stories are reaching, and if you love emotional love stories filled with struggle, hope, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of our new stories, and you'll help our channel grow so we can keep bringing you even more special content. Winter was slowly arriving in Nashville, painting the sky a pale gray and covering the rooftops of modest houses with a veil of damp cold. The sound of hammers and electric saws echoed from the construction site near the train tracks, where 34-year-old Evan Carter was sweating even under the thick, torn coat he'd worn for years. His hands were calloused, and his once bright eyes now carried the weight of sleepless nights and unresolved grief. Evan was tall, lean, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry more than just concrete. They carried mourning, guilt, and the responsibility for a 5-year-old girl who waited for him every night, with questions he no longer knew how to answer. "Daddy, is Mommy coming back tomorrow?" Emily had asked weeks ago as she drew crooked hearts with crayons. He swallowed hard before answering, sitting next to her on the small mattress pushed against the bedroom wall. "She's in heaven, my flower." And from there, she watches over us every night. Emily didn't cry. She simply nodded, hugging a teddy bear with a torn ear, the same one her mother had given her the previous Christmas. Evan thought about her every day. He thought about the accident, the ambulance that took too long, the lack of insurance, and the life that had become a battlefield ever since. Now he picked up odd jobs in construction and repairs just to survive, always afraid of failing. Afraid of not making rent, afraid of not having food for Emily's lunchbox come Monday. On the other side of town, in a poorly lit parking lot behind an old closed-down laundromat, Jessica Moreno was arranging thin blankets over her 4 sleeping children. Inside an old dead SUV, the engine hadn't worked in months, but the car still offered one precious thing: locked doors. It was the closest thing they had to a home. Jessica was 29, with wavy black hair and watchful eyes, like someone carrying the weight of 1,000 wrong decisions, or maybe just forced choices. Her brown skin was dry from the cold and exposure. Her cracked lips trembled as she blew warm air onto her children's hands before tucking them in. She whispered softly while covering the youngest, Mateo, who was 2 years old. "Mommy's here, my love. I promise. No one's going to hurt you again." In the front seat, 10-year-old Diego was still awake, staring through the dirty window with a gaze far too hardened for his age. He didn't say a word, but when Jessica came closer, he finally muttered, "Will we have a home again someday?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to smile, but the truth was, she didn't know. "We will," she replied after a few seconds with a rehearsed firmness. "Mommy just needs to find one more job. But who would hire a woman with no documents, 4 children, no fixed address, and a history of domestic violence?" Her former employer had let her go after discovering the lawsuit with her ex-husband. And even though the physical scars were gone, the others remained, in her constant fear, in her shame, in her distrust of everything and everyone. That night, while Evan wiped dust from his face with a dirty rag and packed up his tools, Jessica curled up in the driver's seat with aching legs and an empty stomach, watching the silent street like someone waiting for a miracle. 2 worlds, 2 lives marked by pain, each surviving on what little they had left: courage and love for their children. They didn't know it yet, but fate was about to bring their paths together. And what seemed like just another day of hardship would actually be the beginning of an unexpected transformation. The sky still held the same gray tone as the night before, and a light drizzle began to fall over the streets of Nashville, dragging with it the biting cold that crept under clothes. Evan held a plastic bag with rice, milk, eggs, and a small tray of ground beef, enough to put together a few meals for him and Emily that week. He walked with his head down through the grocery store parking lot when he heard an argument near the side entrance. He instinctively turned his head at the sound of a raised voice. A burly security guard, wearing a black jacket with the store's logo, was shoving Jessica back with his forearm, pushing her away from the automatic door that refused to open for her. "I told you not to come back here. This isn't a shelter, lady," shouted the man, his voice harsh and impatient. Jessica, holding a loaf of bread in one hand and a loose diaper in the other, tried to reason with him. She was soaking wet, her hair stuck to her face, her breathing fast and shallow. "Please, I'll trade it for this sweatshirt," she said, taking off the worn hoodie she had been using as a blanket for her kids in the car. "My kids don't have diapers. The baby has a rash. Either you leave now or I'm calling the police." She hesitated, her tear-filled eyes searching for even a drop of humanity in his vacant stare. But the security guard had already turned his back, reaching for a radio on his belt. Jessica let the bread fall and, in an automatic gesture, zipped her coat back up as if trying to hide from the world. When she turned to leave, that's when Evan's eyes met hers. There was no makeup, no tricks, just two dark brown eyes. Intense, full of shame, desperation, and a pride that was fighting hard not to collapse. Her bare feet under soaked pants made it clear she had given priority to her kids like any mother would. Evan stopped in his tracks. He felt something in his chest that wasn't pity. It was recognition. He had been there before. At rock bottom, publicly humiliated, in that pain of having no way out. He walked over without thinking, opening his plastic bag. "You need this more than I do," he said, offering the carton of milk and the pack of diapers he had just bought. Jessica looked at him as if she wasn't used to kindness like that. She stood still for a few seconds. "No, I can't accept this. You have a daughter, right? I saw you yesterday at the store. You bought star-shaped cookies." Evan smiled, a little embarrassed. She loves those cookies. But today she asked me for just one thing, to come home early. Whatever's left over, she'll understand. Jessica took a deep breath, holding back her tears. With trembling hands, she accepted the items, trying to mask her shame with a nearly whispered thank you. "Thank you. I promise I'll pay you back." Evan just shook his head. "No need. Just take care of yourself. It's way too cold to be out here. I live over there, in the silver SUV, with them," she said, subtly pointing toward the fogged-up car on the other side of the parking lot. Evan looked at the vehicle. He saw 4 little faces pressed against the window. 2 of them smiling, the other 2 just watching with wide eyes and hidden hunger. One of them, the oldest, gave a small wave. Evan swallowed hard. A lump formed in his throat. Jessica, noticing his expression, quickly tried to explain. "It's just for a few days. I'm looking for work, I swear. It's just hard when you don't have an address, or when you've already lost everything you could lose." She lowered her eyes, and Evan, not even knowing why, couldn't bring himself to just walk away. "Wait here," he said, and walked back into the grocery store. Minutes later, he returned with more bags. A pack of chicken, 2 containers of ready-made soup, boxed juice, and even a new pack of star-shaped cookies. Jessica couldn't say anything. She just looked at him with wet eyes and an expression that carried both shame and gratitude. "They deserve to have a good memory on a bad day too," Evan said, handing over the cookies. Jessica let out a soft, emotional laugh. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice still low. "Evan. And you?" "Jessica." He nodded, glancing once more at the SUV. "They're lucky to have you." "No, I'm the lucky one for still having them. If it weren't for them, I don't know if I'd still be trying." They stood in silence for a moment, and it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the silence between 2 strangers who understood exactly what the other was feeling. The silence of people who had seen hope fade, yet still kept striking matches. Evan looked up at the cloudy sky. And then, at his, "Watch, I need to pick up my daughter from school, but if you really need help, I pass by here sometimes after work." Jessica just nodded, giving a slight tilt of her head. Evan walked away, but deep down, he knew that wouldn't be their last meeting. Something inside him had changed in that moment. And in that fogged-up SUV, with a pack of diapers and a bag of food in her hands, Jessica also felt, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that maybe there were still good people in the world. Neither of them could have imagined that this simple and silent moment was about to change everything. Night fell over Nashville with a colder wind than usual, as if the whole city was curling up in silence. Evan was driving his old pickup truck through the narrow streets of the residential neighborhood where he lived. Beside him, in the passenger seat, Jessica held her youngest son, Mateo, who slept with his head resting on her shoulder. In the back seat, the other three, Diego, Camilla, and Luna, watched the city pass by through the window, their eyes wide and tired. Jessica hadn't spoken a word since they got into the car. Her hands clutched her coat tightly, as if trying to protect herself from something that wasn't just the cold. She glanced at Evan from time to time, but always looked away before he noticed. He broke the silence, his voice low and almost hesitant. "It's not much, but there's some soup and a bit of rice and beans. I made it last night," Jessica nodded. "Anything warm is already more than we've had in weeks." A few minutes later, they arrived at the small building of worn-out brick where Evan lived. They climbed 2 flights of stairs. The apartment door was chipped, but a handmade wreath hanging there showed the touch of a child. "Emily made that for Halloween," Evan explained as he unlocked the door. "She won't let me take it down." Inside, the apartment was modest and small. A living room with a worn-out sofa, a frayed rug, a shelf with some toys stacked on it, and in the corner a small kitchen with old but clean cabinets. Everything smelled like home, simple but alive. Emily ran to the door as soon as she heard the key turning. Her light blonde hair was tied in 2 crooked braids she had done herself. "Daddy!" she shouted, jumping into Evan's arms before. Noticing the guests, she paused, curious, staring at Diego with interest. He, embarrassed, looked down at his feet. Evan crouched beside her. "These are my friends. They're going to have dinner with us tonight." Jessica, feeling awkward, stepped forward. "I know it's a lot, but thank you. Really, I didn't expect—" Evan raised his hand, gently interrupting her. "You'd do the same for me. I'm sure of it." As the kids sat on the floor with warm plates, Diego and Emily soon started chatting about cartoons. She showed him a little book with colorful drawings, and he, still a bit cautious, laughed at a simple joke. Jessica watched, in silence, moved by a scene she hadn't witnessed in so long, her children laughing without fear. Camilla asked for more rice. Luna used her fingers to scoop the last bits of sauce from her plate. Mateo slept in his mother's arms, content. When everyone was done eating, Evan started gathering the dishes. Jessica quickly stood up. "Let me, please. You've already done more than enough." He gave a sideways smile without replying and walked to the kitchen. She followed him. The silence that settled between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was as if both knew there was more to be said, but didn't know where to start. Jessica finally looked at the floor and spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't want to intrude. We'll leave soon. I just wanted to ask if we could sleep in the garage tonight, just on the floor. I brought blankets. We won't be a bother." Evan tensed his shoulders, feeling the weight of the decision. He thought of Emily. He thought of his neighbors. He thought of everything that could go wrong, but when he looked at the couch, where Diego was gently running his fingers through Luna's hair as she dozed off, fear gave way to compassion. "No, the garage is too cold," he replied. Jessica nodded with resignation. "I understand. You'll sleep inside." She looked at him, surprised. "You can leave the little ones with Emily in her room. I'll..." Sleep on the couch tonight. You can sleep over there in the corner near the shelf. I'll set up an air mattress." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "You don't have to do this." Evan looked at her seriously. "I know." For a few seconds she tried to protest, but then she let the air out of her lungs like someone carrying tons of weight and whispered, "Thank you for treating me like a human being." That night, with the children asleep, the dishes washed, and a silence that didn't hurt, Evan lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling. What was he doing? His life was already hard, but for the first time since losing his wife, he felt something he couldn't name. A need to take care of someone, not just out of obligation, but out of desire. And in the bedroom, watching over her children's sleep, Jessica closed her eyes and for the first time in many months felt something close to safety. But the peace of that night was hiding what fate had already been preparing, and that would soon come back to test everything they believed about: trust and starting over. Morning light filtered through the crooked blinds of the small apartment, revealing floating dust particles in the air. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the muffled sound of cartoons playing on the living room TV, where Emily and Luna laughed together, sitting on a blanket spread across the floor. Evan was in the kitchen, wearing an apron and holding a wooden spoon, making pancakes. It was Sunday, and for the first time in months, the space around him felt alive. The sound of children's laughter filled the void that had been left in the silence ever since his wife's death. He looked at the scene and felt a strange lightness, a cautious kind of hope. Jessica appeared in the hallway, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes still marked by exhaustion. Mateo slept curled up in her arms, his head resting on her shoulder. She smiled as she saw Emily sharing toys with Luna. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "Pancakes are a luxury." Evan shrugged, smiling back. "Here we make luxury out of what we have." Jessica thanked him once again and went back to the makeshift room. As she packed a bag with clothes to wash, an envelope fell to the floor without her noticing. It was white, crumpled with a torn edge. Evan saw the paper slide to his feet and picked it up instinctively. When he read what was written, his smile disappeared. It was a legal document, a restraining order. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Emergency Protective Order." Just below, the name Jessica, and in bold, the name Miguel Herrera. Evan kept reading. Documented threats, reports of physical abuse, police reports, and a court order forbidding the man from coming within 300 meters of her and the children. His stomach turned. She wasn't just a woman in hardship. Jessica was running, and that man was still out there. Jessica returned to the living room minutes later and saw him standing with the envelope in his hand. Her face went pale instantly. "You read it?" she asked, her voice already cracking. Evan looked at her, unsure of what to say. Words felt small compared to what that paper meant. "It fell out of your coat." "I didn't know what it was until—" Jessica took the envelope with trembling hands and pressed it against her chest, as if trying to erase it from existence. "You have to understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried to do everything right. I went to the police, filed a report, got the order, but he disappeared, and now no one knows where he is. He swore he'd find me, that he'd take my kids from me. I just want to get away from him. That's all I've been trying to do." Evan stood still. His heart felt torn between fear of putting his daughter at risk, and compassion, witnessing a woman desperately fighting for safety, for a new beginning, for dignity. "You should have told me," he said, not harshly, but with a clear weight in his voice. Jessica took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "Would you have let us sleep here if you knew? Would you have put your daughter at risk for someone you barely know?" Evan didn't answer. This time, the silence was heavy. Jessica slowly nodded, as if confirming a truth she had already expected to hear. That's why I don't tell people, because once they know, they leave, and it all starts over again. Another neighborhood, another name, another fear. She turned, walking over to the backpack where the kids' clothes were. I'll grab our things. We'll be gone before lunch. Jessica, Evan called, but she was already gathering Diego and Luna's toys. You don't have to say anything, I get it. You've been more than kind to us, and I don't want to cause more trouble. Just give me an hour, please. He stood there, watching this woman who, even broken inside, still found the strength to keep her head high in front of her children. She picked up the toys quickly, trying to keep the kids from noticing the tension. But Diego had already figured it out. He looked at Evan with guarded, protective eyes, as if to say, "Don't hurt her too." Emily walked into the room holding a drawing, unaware of the tension in the air. "Daddy, look, I drew Mommy, you, me, and them too." She pointed at Diego and Luna. "Can we play family?" Evan looked at the colorful picture, then at Jessica, who was now holding her son tightly, fighting back tears. The silence was broken by the sound of Evan's phone vibrating on the counter. It was an unknown number. He didn't answer, but something inside him knew. Time was running out, and hard decisions would have to be made much sooner than he had expected. The weather in Nashville felt strange that evening. The sky, heavy with dark clouds, seemed to announce something bigger than rain. Inside the small apartment, Jessica was making sandwiches with the leftover lunch, while Emily and Luna played with dolls on the living room rug. Diego, ever watchful, stood by the window, squinting as if sensing something. Evan got home early from work that day. He left his boots at the door, wiping the dried mud off on the stair steps, and carried a small bag of cookies he had promised the kids. But before he could ring the doorbell, something caught his attention. A black sedan was parked across the street. Its tinted windows hid whoever was inside, but the engine was running, and the way the car kept adjusting its position, it was far too suspicious to be a coincidence. Evan climbed the steps slowly, but alert. As soon as he walked into the apartment, Diego stepped away from the window and looked at him seriously. "The black car's been there for a while," he said quietly, "since before lunch." Jessica froze. Her hands stopped mid-motion. She turned slowly, as if the name she feared would echo through the air. "Did you see the driver?" Evan asked. Diego nodded. "He's wearing a cap, but I recognized him. It's him." Jessica dropped the knife on the counter. The metallic clank hit like a gunshot in the sudden silence. She ran to the window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and saw the car. The same car, the same cracked headlights, the same worn tires. Her knees almost gave out. "It's Miguel," she whispered. "He found us." Evan didn't hesitate. He went back outside, crossed the street under the light drizzle, and slammed his hand on the hood of the car. "Hey, get out of there now!" he shouted, with the rage of someone who refuses to watch anyone be hunted anymore. The car door opened slowly. Miguel Herrera stepped out with a crooked smile. He was an average-height man, broad, with an unkempt beard, and dark eyes that gleamed with a kind of cruel arrogance. Tattoos lined his arms, and a thin scar cut across his right eyebrow. He looked at Evan like he didn't feel threatened at all. "You must be her new hero," he said, adjusting his cap. "Nice of you, but this is between me and my wife." "She's not your wife, and you're not going near her or the kids," Evan replied firmly. Miguel let out a short laugh. "You think some piece of paper's gonna stop me? She can't. He'd forever." Evan stepped closer. "If you go up those stairs, you're leaving in cuffs or on a stretcher. Your choice." Miguel stared at him for several long seconds, then got back into the car with a cynical smirk. "This isn't over," he muttered before slamming the door and speeding off. Evan walked back into the apartment with clenched fists. His heart was pounding, his breath short. Jessica was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around her children, trying to calm them down. Her eyes met Evan's the moment he walked in. "It was him, wasn't it?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Evan nodded. "Yes, but I made him leave." Jessica stood up slowly. She was pale. There was something in her eyes that Evan hadn't seen until then. Guilt. "He'll come back. He never stops after the first time." "You don't have to leave, Jessica," Evan said. "We can call the police, reinforce protection." No, she cut him off, her voice sharp with pain. "I can't let him put you and Emily in danger. He's sick, Evan. He's not afraid of anything. And if something happened to your daughter because of me, I could never forgive myself." Diego stood up, alarmed. "No, we just found a good place. I don't want to go back to the street." Jessica knelt in front of him, holding his face with both hands. "My love, it's not forever. It's just until we find another place. I have to protect you and protect the person who had the courage to help us." Evan stepped closer, trying to hold back his emotions. "You don't have to go through this alone again." Jessica looked up at him, her eyes full of tears. "But you have someone who depends on you. And I've already lost everything once. I won't let another innocent person pay for my mistake." They looked at each other for a few seconds. Evan wanted to insist. He wanted to ask her to stay. But in that moment he understood that Jessica was doing what she knew best, sacrificing for the ones she loved. Later that night, Evan watched the apartment door close slowly. There was no formal goodbye, just heavy silence, the scent of lukewarm coffee in the air, and 5 folded blankets left on the couch. Emily woke up in the middle of the night and asked, "Daddy, where are our friends?" Evan, sitting in the dark living room, whispered back, "They left, but this isn't the end." The night settled quietly over Nashville, and the city slept beneath a light drizzle that made the cobblestone streets glisten with lonely shine. The small building where Evan lived felt even emptier now, without the sound of children's laughter, without Jessica's careful steps in the kitchen, without the peaceful breathing of sleeping kids in the next room. The couch still held the crease from the folded blankets she had left, and on the living room table a scribbled paper colored in crayon, a drawing of Diego and Emily holding hands, smiling, with a yellow sun at the top of the page. Evan held the drawing in his hands like it was too fragile for the world. Emily woke, up around 3 in the morning, her hair tangled, her face pressed against the pillow. She walked into the living room, where Evan still sat in the dark, motionless, like a statue in mourning. "Daddy, where's Luna? I wanted to show her my new doll." Evan swallowed hard. It took him a moment to answer. They left, sweetheart." Emily frowned, confused. "But why? Weren't we a family?" Evan didn't know what to say, because that's exactly how he felt too, as if something that was already his had been ripped away without warning, as if life had reopened the same wound he'd spent years trying to heal. He pulled his daughter close, wrapping his arms tightly around her. "Sometimes good people go away, not because they want to, but because they think they're protecting us," Emily cried softly, hiding her face in his chest. "But I wanted them to stay." Evan closed his eyes, feeling a guilt heavier than the sacks of cement he carried every day. The next day, he went to work like a machine. His hands did what they knew by heart, but his eyes wandered far. Every child passing on the street made his heart race for a second, hoping it was Diego or Camila. Every dark-haired woman made him hold his breath, imagining Jessica might appear, like a miracle. But she didn't show up. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Evan grabbed his car keys and started driving around the city. He stopped at 3 shelters. At 2 of them, the receptionist wouldn't even check the records without a full name. At the 3rd, a social worker flipped through the files slowly but shook her head. "Sorry, we don't have anyone by that name here." He tried churches, community centers, even gas stations in the outskirts. He showed an old picture Emily had drawn with the kids around the table. Some said they hadn't seen anyone, others just avoided eye contact. On the third night of searching, he parked in the empty lot of a downtown church, turned off the engine, and sat there with his head resting against the steering wheel. The city around him carried on, indifferent to his pain. For the first time in years, he cried, not from fear, not from loneliness, but because for a few days he had felt something he hadn't known still existed, a sense of belonging, and now, once again, it was gone. He remembered her words. I just wanted to protect the one who had the courage to help. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe she had to leave so Emily would be safe, but that didn't ease the guilt. He realized now how much he had hidden behind fear, how many walls he had built to avoid pain, and how that had left others to carry the burden of danger alone. That night, before driving home, Evan looked up at the cloudy sky and whispered, "Give me one more chance, just one more." Winter held firm in Nashville, with freezing mornings and afternoons that never seemed to warm up. Evan had returned to his routine, work and caring for Emily, but something inside him remained broken. No matter how much he smiled for his daughter, no matter how well he faked normalcy, not a single day went by without thinking about Jessica and the kids. He still stopped by shelters, still searched corners of the city quietly. He no longer told Emily he was looking because he didn't want to see the light in her eyes fade again. On a grey Wednesday afternoon, Evan stopped by a small neighborhood diner near an abandoned warehouse. He was tired, covered in cement, and ordered a strong coffee to fight off the cold. As he sat down, he noticed a strange movement near the counter. A boy, with a worn hoodie pulled over part of his face, was trying to stuff a whole sandwich into his coat pocket, the waitress shouted. The boy bolted outside like lightning, knocking over a basket of napkins. Evan stood up instinctively. It felt far too familiar. He ran out the door and shouted, "Hey, wait!" The boy slipped on the wet sidewalk, fell, and tried to get up, but Evan was already too close. When he pulled back the hood, the world froze for a second. Diego. The boy's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked frozen in place. Then he broke down. The tears came like a dam bursting. His shoulders trembled, and the anger he had carried in his eyes since the first day now gave way to an old pain, too heavy for such a small heart. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to bring food to Luna. She has a fever. Mum's trying, but we just can't anymore." Evan dropped to his knees in front of him, not caring about the wet ground. "Where are you?" "Guys?" Diego nodded, sobbing. "Back there behind the warehouse, an old mattress and some blankets we found in the trash." Without hesitation, Evan took his hand and ran to the alley. The smell of mildew and grime was strong. Behind a pile of debris, there was a torn tarp covering a cramped space. Inside, Jessica was sitting with Mateo in her arms and Camilla's face resting against her chest. Luna whimpered, her cheeks flushed with fever. When Jessica saw Evan, her eyes widened in shock. "No, Evan, you shouldn't have come." He knelt down in front of her, unable to hide his anger at seeing the children in that condition. "You really think I was going to keep sleeping peacefully while you were behind a warehouse, starving?" Jessica looked down, her face burning. "With shame. I didn't want to disrupt your life anymore. I'd already done enough." "That's enough," he interrupted. "No more running. No more carrying this alone. I'm not here to offer shelter. I'm here to offer a new beginning." Jessica looked at him, confused and exhausted. "You don't understand, Evan. Miguel is still out there. He never stops. Then we'll fight together, the right way, with a lawyer, with the law, and if he shows up again, he'll have to go through me. I'm not your savior, Jessica, but I want to be someone who walks beside you." Tears ran silently down her face. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because when you came into my life, I was broken too, and you gave me something I didn't even know still existed, hope, and I'm not letting that go." Jessica didn't say a word. She just stood up, picked up Luna, and walked toward Evan. He opened his arms. She hesitated for a moment, then rested her forehead on his shoulder. That night, for the first time since their escape, the children slept in beds. Luna was given medicine. Camila had a warm bath. Diego shared dinner with Emily and laughed. And Jessica sat silently on the couch, with a blanket over her shoulders, watching the scene like someone who still couldn't believe it was real. Evan watched her from across the room. He knew that starting over wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he was ready to walk that road with her. The days following the reunion were full of rebuilding, but also vigilance. Jessica, still fragile, couldn't sleep deeply. Any sound from the street made her heart race. The children were beginning to adapt to the new routine, and Emily was thrilled to have her borrowed siblings, as she cheerfully called them. But Evan knew that even though their home was now a refuge, the past wouldn't be erased so easily. It was during a conversation with Clarice, a social worker from the local church, that the guidance came. Jessica needed to legalize her immigration status and file for full legal custody of the children. The lack of documentation was a dangerous loophole, and Evan didn't want to see this woman living in fear any longer. If he comes back with a decent lawyer, he could claim abandonment. He could try to take the kids, especially if he proves you lived on the streets with them, Clarice said, concerned. Jessica went cold at the thought. For a moment, she felt the ground disappear beneath her. He never cared about them. Not once. He only used them to control me. But now he knows you're trying to start over, and men like him, when they feel they've lost control, they become even more dangerous. Evan clenched his fist on the table. Then we'll do this the right way. She has a right to protection, a right to dignity, and those kids deserve peace. It was Clarice who referred them to a community attorney, Mr. Benjamin Alcott, a middle-aged black man, calm-voiced and kind-eyed, who devoted part of his life to cases like Jessica's. He welcomed everyone into his office with patience and respect. This story isn't uncommon, unfortunately. But she's strong, and with the right evidence, we can turn this around. But what about my citizenship? Jessica asked, her voice hesitant. I came legally, but my papers expired. I became invisible. Benjamin looked at her calmly. You ran to save your children, and you have documentation of abuse, police reports, and a protection order. We'll start with a humanitarian adjustment request and move forward with custody. But be ready. The process can be brutal, and it was. Less than 2 weeks after they filed the request, Jessica received a court notice. Miguel had filed for custody of the children, accusing her of abandonment, negligence, and emotional instability. It was a direct attack on her dignity based on lies. She panicked. He wants to take my kids. He's doing it just to destroy me, she said, locked in the bathroom, crying silently so the children wouldn't hear. Evan gently knocked on the door. Jessica, look at me. He's not going to win. We're going to fight with everything we have. I'm with you. On the day of the preliminary hearing, Jessica arrived at the courthouse wearing a simple borrowed dress, her hair tied back with a worn elastic band, and her hands trembling as she held her documents. But she wasn't alone. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, Emily and Diego's teachers, church volunteers and shelter staff, all holding signs. Justice for Jessica. Protecting is loving. Family is care, not just blood. The local support grew so strong that the city press showed up. When Jessica saw the scene, she froze on the sidewalk. Evan approached from behind, touched her shoulder and whispered, "You're not alone anymore. Everyone here knows who you are, and more importantly, who you're not." During the hearing, Miguel tried to appear calm, but his lawyers used harsh words, questioned his disappearance, and showed old photos to give the appearance of stability. But it was Diego who changed everything. At the end of the hearing, Benjamin asked for permission for the boy to speak. With a steady voice, Diego stood and said before the judge, "My mom ran away to save us. He used to hit her, I saw it. And he hit me too when she wasn't around. We were cold, hungry, but she never abandoned us. She just wanted us to live, and I've never felt as safe as I do now." The judge paused for a few seconds. The prosecution requested time to re-evaluate Miguel's petition. The battle wasn't over, but in that moment, Jessica had won something important: the right to be heard. Evan held her hand as they left the courthouse. For the first time, she didn't pull away. The Nashville sky was clear that spring morning, as if even it had paused to hear the verdict. Inside the courtroom, the silence was so heavy you could hear Jessica's quickened breath. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the judge. Beside her, Evan sat upright, but the tension in his clenched jaw betrayed his own nerves. After months of hearings, evidence, statements, and endless trips to immigration, the moment had finally arrived. After reviewing the documents, testimonies, and presented circumstances, the judge began, "This court grants Ms. Jessica Moreno full custody of the minors Diego, Camila, Luna, and Mateo." Jessica closed her eyes for a moment. The sound of those words hit deep in her chest. A mix of relief, exhaustion, and long-held pain exploded in the form of tears. She tried to hold them back, but couldn't. The tears streamed silently, and without hesitation, Evan took her hand and squeezed it tightly, as if to say, "It's over now," or almost. The victory was bittersweet, because even with the favorable ruling, Miguel had vanished. After the last hearing in which he lost, he never showed up again. His lawyer tried to contact him, the police were notified, but there was no trace. Jessica slept every night with the door locked and the hallway light on. The fear hadn't left. It was just quieter now, lurking in the background. But there was something different in her, a strength that grew by the day. She knew that living in fear was even more painful than facing it. "He might show up again," Jessica said one night, sitting with Evan on the apartment porch. The city breathed calmly outside, and the streetlights cast soft reflections on the windows. "If he does, he'll see you're not alone anymore," Evan replied without looking directly at her. Jessica lowered her head, thoughtful. "You know I still have a lot to fix inside me, right?" "Who doesn't?" he answered with a slight smile. "I don't know if I can love again. Sometimes even a touch scares me. Sometimes a gesture sends me back in time. I feel broken." Evan turned his face and looked at her gently. "You're not broken, Jessica. You were hurt. And wounds, they heal. They just need time and care." She looked into his eyes for a long moment, unhurried. There was no rush between them anymore. No need to prove anything. Just a quiet desire to stay, to be close. The following week, they began going to the same park every Saturday. The kids played together, Diego and Emily now inseparable. Luna had fully recovered from her chronic fever. Camila laughed easily, and Mateo was already running, tripping over his own little legs, calling Evan Uncle Ev. Jessica began cooking at Evan's apartment on the weekends. Slowly, a few pieces of clothing started mixing with his in the closet, and though neither of them said anything officially, there was a silent understanding. That house was now theirs. One quiet night, Evan was sitting on the couch reading a book when Jessica approached quietly, barefoot, her hair down. She sat beside him in silence, watching Emily's breathing in the room next door. "Can I lean on you?" she asked, almost like a child. Evan simply opened his arms and she rested her head on his shoulder. There, in that simple living room, with the distant sound of sleeping children, a different kind of love was born, a love made of pieces, carefully rebuilt. It wasn't a passionate whirlwind. It was a calm, patient love, a love that asked for nothing but presence. Evan knew her past would still cast shadows, and Jessica knew his heart carried scars too, but now they were together, and that was enough. 2 years had passed since that day in court. Life in Nashville carried on, with its seasons marked by humid heat, biting cold, and golden morning skies that seemed to bring new promises. In the heart of the city, on a once-forgotten corner, now stood a modest but vibrant storefront. A wooden sign with hand-carved letters read, Casa Esperanza. It was a welcoming, homey restaurant, full of the smell of homemade food and voices intertwined with laughter and stories. In the kitchen, Jessica ran everything with a floral apron and a towel over her shoulder. Her hands still bore the marks of hard times, but they were now steady and confident. Around her, other women like her, single mothers, widows, immigrants, had found more than just work there. They had found dignity. In the dining area, Evan served tables alongside 2 young men in recovery. He laughed with customers, told stories, and sometimes just stood silently, soaking in the energy of the place that now carried the name of everything they had built together. "Table 7's out of juice," shouted an energetic voice from the kitchen. It was Camilla, now 12, in charge of the digital orders. Across the room, Luna organized napkins with near-military precision. Mateo ran back and forth with an empty tray and the wide grin of someone who already feels like he owns the place. Emily and Diego, now teenagers, attended the same public school. They sat in the same row, worked on group projects, and debated which college they wanted to attend. Diego, who once carried the weight of a man on his small shoulders, now laughed freely and said he wanted to be a teacher. Emily said she wanted to be like her mom, even if she wasn't her mom by blood. One afternoon, the restaurant closed early. It was a special Sunday. The sun set gently over the rooftops of the city, and inside the main dining area, Jessica turned off the lights and lit candles inside glass jars on the tables. Soft music filled the room. 2 years. Feels like yesterday," she said, leaning on the counter, looking around. Evan appeared beside her, one of the children asleep in his arms, and at the same time, "It feels like another life." She looked at him with calm eyes and the expression of someone who had finally found peace. Peace. "Do you still think it was crazy to let me stay that night?" Evan smiled, lightly touching the ring on his finger. "That night, I just knew you couldn't walk away. The rest, we figured out together." Jessica rested her head on his shoulder. The silence between them now was comfortable, filled with everything that no longer needed to be said. At the back of the room, on a small shelf, stood a framed engraving that read, "Family is who stays." That night, before bed, Evan sat on the porch of the house they now called home. The starry sky was the same as always, but he saw it with different eyes. "Life doesn't always give us what we want," he said, as if telling the story to someone far away, or maybe to himself. "But sometimes it gives us exactly what we need to believe again." He paused, breathed in the warm night air. Family is who stays, even when everything says to run. And inside that house, where fear once screamed louder than hope, now there was only the sound of peace. And the certainty that the strongest bonds don't come from blood. They come from the choice to love and to stay.